The musical system of ancient Greece evolved over a period of more than 500 years from simple scales of tetrachords, or divisions of the perfect fourth, to the perfect immutable system, encompassing a span of 15 pitch keys. Any discussion of ancient Greek music, theoretical, philosophical or aesthetic, is fraught with two problems. There are few examples of written music, and there are many, sometimes fragmentary theoretical and philosophical accounts. This article provides an overview that includes examples of different kinds of classification while also trying to show the broader form evolving from the simple tetrachord to system as a whole. Systema Ametabolon, an overview of the tone system. At about the turn of the 5th to 4th century BCE, the tonal system, Systema Teleion, had been elaborated in its entirety, as an initial introduction to the principal names of the divisions of the system and the framing tetrachords. A depiction of notes and positional terms follows. Please note, this is an as yet not completely translated version of a German illustration, hence, B in the illustration is B-flat and H, B. Greek theorists conceived of scales from higher pitch to lower, and the largest intervals were always at the top of the tetrachord, with the smallest at the bottom. The characteristic interval of a tetrachord is the largest one. The image shows the descending 2 octaves of tones with corresponding modern note symbols and ancient Greek vocal and instrumental note symbols in the central columns. The modern note names are merely there for an orientation as to the intervals. They do not correspond to ancient Greek pitches or note names. The section delimited by a blue brace is the range of the central octave. The range is approximately what we today depict as follows. The Greek note symbols originate from the work of Egert Pohlmann. The greater perfect system was composed of 4 stacked tetrachords called the high pattern, meson, diesugmenon and hyperboleion tetrachords. Each of these tetrachords contains the 2 fixed notes that bound it. The octaves are each composed of 2 light tetrachords connected by 1 common tone, the synephate. At the position of the parames, which should be the connecting tone, the continuation of the system encounters a boundary. To retain the logic of the internal divisions of the tetrachords such that mes and not consist of 3 whole tone steps, an interstitial note. The diazoris was introduced between parames and emi-acute se. The tetrachord diesugmenon is the divided. To bridge this inconsistency, the system allowed moving the eni-acute te 1 step up, permitting the construction of the synemonon tetrachord. The use of the synemonon tetrachord affected a modulation of the system, hence the name Systema Metabolon. The modulating system, also the lesser perfect system. It was considered a part, built of 3 stacked tetrachords, the high pattern, meson and synemonon. The first 2 of these are the same as the first 2 tetrachords of the greater perfect, with the third tetrachord placed above the meson. When viewed together, with the synemonon tetrachord placed between the meson and diesugmenon tetrachords, they make up the immutable system. In sum, it is clear that the ancient Greeks conceived of a unified system with the octave as the unifying structure. The very last tone no longer belongs to the system of tetrachords reflected in its name of the proslambonomenos, the adjoined. Below elaborates the mathematics that led to the logic of the system of tetrachords just described. The Pythagoreans. After the discovery of the fundamental intervals, the first systematic divisions of the octave we know of were those of Pythagoras, to whom was often attributed the discovery that the frequency of a vibrating string is inversely proportional to its length. Pythagoras construed the intervals arithmetically, allowing for 1 to 1 equals unison, 2 to 1 equals octave, 3 to 2 equals fifth, 4 to 3 equals fourth within the octave. Pythagoras's scale consists of a stack of perfect fifths, the ratio 3 to 2. The earliest such description of a scale is found in Philolaus Fr. B6. Philolaus recognizes that, if we go up the interval of a fourth from any given note, and then up the interval of a fifth, the final note is an octave above the first note. Thus, the octave is made up of a fourth and a fifth. Philolaus's scale thus consisted of the following intervals: 9 to 8, 9 to 8, 256 to 243. These three intervals take us up a fourth: 9 to 8, 9 to 8, 9 to 8. 256 to 243. These four intervals make up a fifth and complete the octave from our starting note. This scale is known as the Pythagorean Diatonic and is the scale that Plato adopted in the construction of the world soul in the Timaeus. The next notable Pythagorean theorist we know of is Archytas, contemporary and friend of Plato, who explained the use of arithmetic, geometric and harmonic means in tuning musical instruments. Archytas is the first ancient Greek theorist to provide ratios for all three genera. Archytas provided a rigorous proof that the basic musical intervals cannot be divided in half, or in other words, that there is no mean proportional between numbers in super-particular ratio. Euclid in his The Division of the Canon further developed Archytas's theory, elaborating the acoustics with reference to the frequency of vibrations. The three divisions of the tetrachords of Archytas were the enharmonic 5 to 4, 36 to 35, and 28 to 27, the chromatic 32 to 27, 243 to 224, and 28 to 27, and the diatonic 9 to 8, 8 to 7, and 28 to 27. The three tunings of Archytas appear to have corresponded to the actual musical practice of his day. Tetrachords were classified in ancient Greek theory into genera depending on the position of the third note likanos from the bottom of the lower tetrachord. The interval between this note and the uppermost defined the genus. A likanos a minor third from the bottom and one whole from the top. Genus diatonic. If the interval was a minor third, about one whole tone from the bottom. Genus chromatic. If the interval was a major third with the four thirds, genus enharmonic. In Archytas's case, only the likanos varies. More generally, depending on the positioning of the interposed tones in the tetrachords, three genera of all 7 octave species can be recognized. The diatonic genus is composed of tones and semitones. The chromatic genus is composed of semitones and a minor third. The enharmonic genus consists of a major third and 2 quarter tones or dieces. After the introduction of the Aristoxenus system, the framing interval of the fourth is fixed, while the 2 internal pitches are movable. Within the basic forms, the intervals of the chromatic and diatonic genera were varied further by 3 and 2 shades, respectively. The elaboration of the tetrachords was also accompanied by penta and hexachords. As stated above, the union of tetra and pentachords yields the octachord, or the complete heptatonic scale. However, there is sufficient evidence that 2 tetrachords were initially conjoined with an intermediary or shared note. The final evolution of the system did not end with the octave as such but with systema tellion, a set of 5 tetrachords linked by conjunction and disjunction into arrays of tones spanning 2 octaves. After elaborating the systema tellion in light of empirical studies of the division of the tetrachord and composition of tonoi, harmoniae, we examine the most significant individual system, that of Aristoxenus, which influenced much classification well into the Middle Ages. The empirical research of scholars like Richard Crocker, André Barbera, and John Chalmers has made it possible to look at the ancient Greek systems as a whole without regard to the tastes of any one ancient theorist. The primary genera they examine are those of Pythagoras, Archytas, Aristoxenus, and Ptolemy. The following reproduces tables from Chalmers show the common ancient harmoniae, the octave species in all genera and the system as a whole with all tones of the gamut. The octave species in all genera. The order of the octave species names in the following table are the traditional Greek, followed by later alternates, Greek and other. The species and notation are built around the E mode, although the Dorian, Phrygian, and Lydian modes have distinctive tetrachordal forms. These forms were never named after their parent modes by any of the Greek theorists. The sign indicates a somewhat flattened version of the named note, the exact degree of flattening depending on the tuning involved. The listed first for the Dorian is the proslambonomenos, which was appended as it was, and falls out of the tetrachord scheme. These tables are a depiction of Aristide's quintillanuses in harmonic harmoniae, the diatonic of Henderson and John Chalmers' chromatic versions. Chalmers, from whom they originate, states in the enharmonic and chromatic forms of some of the harmoniae, it has been necessary to use both AD in either AD flat or D flat flat because of the non-heptatonic nature of these scales. See and F are synonyms for D flat flat, AG flat flat. The appropriate tunings for these scales are those of Archites and Pythagoras. The superficial resemblance of these octave species with the church modes is misleading. The conventional representation as a section is incorrect. The species were retunings of the central octave such that the sequences of intervals corresponded to the notes of the perfect immutable system as depicted above. Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Syntynolydian, Ionian classification of Aristoxenus. The nature of Aristoxenus's scales and genera deviated sharply from his predecessors. Aristoxenus introduced a radically different model for creating scales. Instead of using discrete ratios to place intervals, he used continuously variable quantities. Hence the structuring of his tetrachords and the resulting scales have other qualities of consonance. In contrast to Archites, who distinguished his genera only by moving the lichonoi, Aristoxenus varied both lichonoi and parhypate in considerable ranges. The Greek scales in the Aristoxenean tradition were Mixolydian, hypate hypaton parames, Lydian, parhypate hypaton trite dies ugmenon, Phrygian, Lycanos hypaton paraneta dies ugmenon, Dorian, hypate meson neta dies ugmenon, Hyperlydian, parhypate meson trite hyperbolaeon, Hypophrygian, Lycanos meson paraneta hyperbolaeon, common, Locrian, or Hypertorian, Mesoneta hyperbolaeon or proslambonomenos mesa. These names are derived from ancient Greek subgroups, one small region in central Greece, and certain neighboring peoples from Asia Minor. The association of these ethnic names with the octave species appears to precede Aristoxenus, who criticized their application to the tonoi by the earlier theorists whom he called the harmonicists. Aristoxenus's tonoi, the term tonos, was used in four senses. As note, interval, region of the voice, and pitch. We use it of the region of the voice whenever we speak of Dorian, or Phrygian, or Lydian, or any of the other tones. Cleonides attributes 13 tonoi to Aristoxenus, which represent a progressive transposition of the entire system by semitone over the range of an octave between the Hyperdorian and the Hypermixolydian. Aristoxenus's transpositional tonoi, according to Cleonides, were named analogously to the octave species, supplemented with new terms to raise the number of degrees from 7 to 13. However, according to the interpretation of at least two modern authorities, in these transpositional tonoi the Hyperdorian is the lowest, and the Mixolydian next to highest, the reverse of the case of the octave species. Solomon chapter 1984, with nominal bass pitches as follows. Ptolemy and the Alexandrians. In marked contrast to his predecessors, Ptolemy's scales employed a division of the pyknon in the ratio of 1 to 2, melodic, in place of equal divisions. Ptolemy, in his harmonics, E 3 to 11, construed the tonoi differently, presenting all 7 octave species within a fixed octave, through chromatic inflection of the scale degrees. In Ptolemy's system, therefore, there are only 7 tonoi. Matheson 2001c. Ptolemy preserved Archithes's tunings in his harmonics as well as transmitting the tunings of Eratosthenes and Didymos and providing his own ratios and scales. Harmoniae. In music theory, the Greek word harmonia can signify the enharmonic genus of tetrachord, the 7 octave species. or a style of music associated with one of the ethnic types or the tonoi named by them. Particularly in the earliest surviving writings, harmonia is regarded not as a scale, but as the epitome of the stylized singing of a particular district or people or occupation. When the late 6th century poet Lassus of Hermione referred to the Aeolian harmonia, for example, he was more likely thinking of a melodic style characteristic of Greeks speaking the Aeolic dialect than of a scale pattern. In the Republic, Plato uses the term inclusively to encompass a particular type of scale, range and register, characteristic rhythmic pattern, textual subject, etc. The philosophical writings of Plato and Aristotle include sections that describe the effect of different harmoniae on mood and character formation. For example, Aristotle in the Politics. But melodies themselves do contain imitations of character. This is perfectly clear, for the harmoniae have quite distinct natures from one another, so that those who hear them are differently affected and do not respond in the same way to each. To some, such as the one called Mixolydian, they respond with more grief and anxiety; to others, such as the relaxed harmoniae, with more mellowness of mind, and to one another with a special degree of moderation and firmness. Dorian being apparently the only one of the harmoniae to have this effect, while Phrygian creates ecstatic excitement. These points have been well expressed by those who have thought deeply about this kind of education, for they cull the evidence for what they say from the facts themselves. In the Republic, Plato describes the music a person listens to as molding the person's character. Aristotle remarks, "From what has been said, it is evident what an influence music has over the disposition of the mind, and how variously it can fascinate it, and if it can do this, most certainly it is what youth ought to be instructed in." Ethos. The word ethos in this context means moral character, and Greek ethos theory concerns the ways music can convey, foster, and even generate ethical states. Melos. Cleonides describes melic composition, the employment of the material subjects, a harmonic practice with due regard to the requirements of each of the subjects under consideration, which, together with the scales, tonoi, and harmoniae, resemble elements found in medieval modal theory. According to Aristides Quintilianus, melic composition is subdivided into three classes: dithyrambic, nomic, and tragic. These parallel his three classes of rhythmic composition: systoltic, diastoltic, and hesychastic. Each of these broad classes of melic composition may contain various subclasses, such as erotic, comic, and panegyric, and any composition might be elevating, depressing, or soothing. The classification of the requirements we have from Proclus' useful knowledge is preserved by Photios. For the gods, hymn, prosodion, paean, dithyramb, nomos, adornidia, iabachos, and hyperchema. For humans, encomian, epinician, scolian, erotica, epithalamia, hymenios, silos, threnis, and epicadion. For the gods and humans, parthenion, daphniphorica, tripodophorica, oscophorica, and eutica. According to Matheson, such pieces of music were called melos, which in its perfect form comprised not only the melody and the text but also stylized dance movement. Melic and rhythmic composition were the processes of selecting and applying the various components of melos and rhythm to create a complete work. Unicode. Music symbols of ancient Greece were added to the Unicode standard in March 2005 with the release of version 4.1. The Unicode block for the musical system of ancient Greece, called Ancient Greek Musical Notation, is U+1 D200 U+1 D24F.